familiar faces today and delighted to welcome you back, and a lot of new faces. And to you, new to us, we're delighted to have you. This is a Global Heart Hub session as part of our advocacy development program for patient organizations. And today we're going to talk about, or we're going to have a speaker on the evolution of patient leadership. And I'm delighted that we're joined by Julie Drury, who I'll introduce to you in a few moments. Julie is Strategic Lead, Patient Partnerships, Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement. And my name is Neil Johnson. For those of you who haven't met me, I work with an Irish not-for-profit, Heart and Stroke Foundation, and I'm also one of the directors of the Global Heart Hub. And the Global Heart Hub I'll introduce to you in a moment, but today's session is brought to you through us with support from our sponsors, Novartis, V for Pharma, Boehringer Ingelheim, and Servier, and we really appreciate their support in allowing us to continue on this journey of advocacy development. For those of you who are not familiar with us, the Global Heart Hub is a relatively new entity. It's a registered not-for-profit, and we are an international alliance of heart patient organizations. And we basically are aiming to provide a platform where we can unite heart patient organizations across the world. Our aim is to organize and amplify the patient and carer voice of stakeholders in healthcare systems and in their personal healthcare, and build patient organization capacity for advocacy. And also finally to contribute to improved self-care, self-management through patient empowerment. And we came about really because for some strange reason, despite the burden and scale of cardiovascular disease, unlike most other of the common diseases, for some reason or other, our community hasn't come together in a united or structured way. And we think it is time to do so now, given the many changes in healthcare, and particularly changes to the role of the patient. So we have embarked on a journey of, I suppose, advocacy, upskilling and training. And we've started from the very basics of sharing experiences of those who have worked in advocacy from their own particular individual perspectives. And over the coming months, we hope to get deeper and deeper into the very many elements of advocacy. And hopefully next year, mid-year, we will have a more substantial program in the form of perhaps a day-long or maybe 2 half-day boot camp on advocacy training and development. Today, as I said, we're delighted to be joined by Julie Drury. I had the pleasure of hearing Julie speak actually at an event some weeks ago. And after that particular presentation was finished, I did my best to track her down and invite her to talk to us again today. As a mother of a child who was diagnosed with SIFD, Julie has considerable experience in health system navigation, complex care coordination, and patient safety. And her experience has influenced her career path from a career public servant to now a patient family advisor and patient advocacy leader. She's currently strategic lead for patient partnership with the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement. And I know we have a lot of Canadians on the call today, some well known to us and some new to us, and you're very, very welcome. As you'll see and hear, Julie is passionate about the potential of patient, family, caregiver engagement, partnership, and leadership in healthcare. She facilitates and provides perspectives in this regard, supporting the development of framework for authentic patient partnership in healthcare policy, system design, innovation, and quality improvement. And she serves as a board director on several Canadian foundations, regularly consults with healthcare organizations, government, private sector, not-for-profits, and as an expert advisor on patient engagement strategies, patient partnership, and patient leadership. I really don't know how she has time for all of this, but she clearly has and does a very good job. Just in terms of our meeting protocol, I would ask you all to mute, if you wouldn't mind, your microphones right now. Should you wish, sorry, today's presentation is going to actually take the format more of an interview rather than a presentation. So at the end of our conversation, if you have a question, we'd ask you to use the raised hand option. And then if you're speaking, you can turn on your video. And we do have the chat facility, and encourage you to be as interactive as possible in the Q&As, and we will try to ask as many of your questions as possible. And the disclaimer, of course, is that the views or comments expressed by anybody during this recording are personal opinions and do not necessarily represent the views of the Global Heart Hub. So again, thank you for being with us today, and I'm going to hand over now, or I'm going to introduce you now rather, to Julie. So Julie, you should be coming up on my screen, I should think, about now. And let me get it here. So Julie, can we start by maybe just asking you to tell us a little bit about how you got into advocacy in the first place, your journey, so to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And just, it's great to be chatting with all of you today. And I'm glad to see a few Canadians on the call as well. And I just want to let everyone know where I'm joining you from, which is from Ottawa, Ontario, which is the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I have no conflicts to declare in chatting with you all today. So Neil, to go to your first question, as you mentioned in the introduction, my daughter Kate was born unbeknownst to myself and my husband with a rare recessive genetic mitochondrial disease. Mitochondria are the energy cells of your body. They basically produce the energy for our organs and our internal systems to function. And so when mitochondria fail, we get into a lot of organ and system failure. And so Kate had a number of different health issues. But she was also a lovely, vibrant, blonde hair, blue-eyed beauty. And she died 5 years ago after a failed bone marrow transplant in which she contracted intractable graft versus host disease. And so my journey with my daughter through the healthcare system really led me to this work. Kate was undiagnosed for the first 4.5 years of her life. When she was diagnosed, it was through through genetic exome sequencing, which is basically a form of looking through her DNA and finding that one gene, the TRNT1 gene, that contributed to this disease. She was in fact the first person in the world diagnosed with SIFD. So the disease was discovered because of Kate. And so our journey wasn't just in the Canadian healthcare system, it was also international. We consulted with clinicians in the United States, and we also consulted with clinicians in the UK. So a shout out to my UK friends. Many of your physicians contributed to Kate's care. But as a parent who had never really had any kind of experience with the healthcare system other than, caring for ailing parents, this was a real shock to me. And it took a lot of learning to understand how to navigate, how to coordinate her care, how to make sure she was receiving safe care, learning how to talk to doctors and clinicians to make sure that we were on the same page, but to ensure also that they were understanding the expertise that I was developing about Kate's condition and how she needed to be cared for and treated. And literally speaking to hundreds and hundreds of clinicians through the course of her treatment and care. And so I started to realize that, if I was experiencing breakdowns in communication and challenges with systems coordination and accessing health information, then others likely were as well. So I started to volunteer as a parent advisor to our children's hospital about things that could be better for children and for families and youth in our hospital. And then quickly saw opportunities to get more involved in strategic parts of our healthcare system here in Canada. And so I started off locally with our children's hospital and with our provincial healthcare system, our Ministry of Health. And then I started talking to other organizational leaders, both organizational leaders working in physician education and healthcare policy, in regulatory spaces. And then, just the more you get involved, the more you're asked to be involved. And then here I am 12 years later in a strategic leadership role with a Pan-Canadian health organization, where I've really married up my professional lived experience as someone who's worked in the federal government here in Canada in health policy with this space of patient advocacy, patient engagement and partnership, and this evolving space of what we call patient leadership, which is really patients identifying what the challenges are in the healthcare system or systems and helping to devise strategies in a co-designed way to address them.
Yeah, so if I can go back to some of the words you've used there, or reference you've made to navigating the system, how to talk to doctors, the patient experience, right? So in the sort of basics of advocacy, these are the nuts and bolts, really. So in terms of the navigation piece, clearly you weren't from a medical background and you found yourself clearly in uncharted territory, an undiagnosed condition. What are the learnings from the navigation piece of your journey that you'd share in terms of advice, I suppose, for advocacy?
Advocacy for me really was about relationship building and seeking others who were in a similar position as to I was, other parents of medically complex or fragile children, looking into the rare disease community and creating alliances there. Looking for other parents who were already involved in patient partnership and patient engagement, and learning from them as to what was happening in this space and how could I become more involved. So it's starting off of creating some relationships outside of the typical friendships and working relationships that I already had. This was a completely new world of relationships. It was also trying to understand how the healthcare system was structured, because I had to be able to survive it. So knowing the nuances of what did a transition of care look like from hospital to home? What did it look like to engage with home care? Learning more about Kate's disease and her condition, learning how to speak with physicians and clinicians, and what did they need from me when I presented to the emergency department with my daughter? What did they need from me in order to give her the best care? And so I quickly, learned that they didn't always have the most ready access to her health information. So I pulled together a binder and I kept that updated with her most relevant health information. We asked our clinical team to create a one-pager for us so that we could better advocate and tell her story when we arrived at the emergency department if we were encountering a new clinician. So I started looking for strategies on how to be able to approach the healthcare system as a parent, but an informed parent, one that was understanding how to speak to physicians using their language. I asked regularly for meetings with them, team meetings, and this was new to them. They don't really collaborate across specialty areas, and so bringing them all into one room and having a conversation about Kate was actually novel. So I think I brought a lot of my own sort of personal experience as to what I did in my professional life into how do I actually build something, structure something around this child to keep her safe in the system, and learning about how the system worked. And I recognize too that that's not something that every patient can do. And so one of the things that I do in my work is I talk to healthcare organizations and I talk to physician leadership organizations like the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada as to how to train clinicians to be able to engage and partner, because it can't be one-sided. It can't be constantly the patient trying to advocate for themselves and trying to find a way to navigate the system. It also has to be about the clinicians understanding how to support patients, how to support them in self-care and self-management, and how to support them in their own agency around their care. And that's not something that's taught right now in the 17 medical schools across Canada, save for one at the University of Montreal, where they actually are trying to embed this approach. So it's got to be two-sided. There's the advocacy role, certainly for the patient, get yourself informed, find people within your circle. If this is a heart health situation, then talking to other patients who've got experience in heart health and starting to understand the language and how the system is structured, the one that you are actually in. So you're going to want to understand, how is the heart healthcare system structured in my jurisdiction? What do I need to know about it? So it's not just about the disease itself. It's about everything that comes with how do you support yourself in living with that disease.
Yeah, so I think what even though we are talking in your case about with a pediatric care pathway, and the majority of the people on this call are coming from the perspective, I guess, of adult cardiovascular care. All of the issues you've just mentioned there are as relevant. And I suppose there's two things that you're illustrating. One is the your own activation as a carer in this case to understand and to navigate the system. But then at a higher level, what you're now doing in your day-to-day life is actually bringing about the changes to the system that accommodate that. And I think that's where all of us, I suppose, as patient advocates, aspire to make a difference, is to those changes. So can we talk a little bit about the again, going back to those early days where it was new for you and clearly new for the physicians and the healthcare workers as well? Was there much resistance? Was there much pushback? Were you dismissed? Did you find it difficult to be heard?
It depended very much on the clinician, on the clinical team. And it also depended on, if I was working at more of an organizational level, on the administrative team or the program or policy team that I was working with. And so again, I was able to lean on my professional background to figure out how do I navigate different types of relationships? How do I sort of, approach the naysayers? And, one of the things that guides me as my true north is to be gentle in my approach, to push, but to know when you're pushing too hard. So to be fierce, but to be gentle as well. And so this isn't about, telling anyone that they're doing something wrong or they're not doing something right, or that my child's care isn't appropriate, but it's how can we partner together, asking a lot of questions, and helping to as well bring them to an understanding of the evidence. So one of the things that we have in our toolbox as patients, families, and caregivers is that there's a body of evidence that is very clear that engaging and partnering with patients on a one-to-one care basis changes patient experience. It changes patient outcomes for the better. It addresses patient harm and patient safety in a positive way. It improves transitions in care. It actually improves communication between care teams. And again, the evidence is clear. And so when you're talking to, medical professionals or people that are leading across the medical system, and they are an evidence-based entity, they respond to that. The other thing that is emerging now in our body of evidence here in Canada, but also internationally, is that system change is starting to occur because of partnering with patients in co-design or collaboration. And so, doing patient experience journey mapping, doing co-design around policy, we are seeing changes to healthcare policy and systems in a positive sense as a result. And it's leading to better patient care, improved patient safety, and better outcome. So that's one of the tools I use in my toolbox. But again, I don't fly it in their face. It's more, were you aware that if we were partnering more in care, and if I had more information about this, and if we were communicating a little bit better, that Kate would be safer? And so I wouldn't necessarily say it in that specific way in a care context, but making it really clear that me partnering in her care was going to lead to better care and better safety for her was sort of an ongoing conversation. And of course, it wasn't well received by everyone. We certainly had instances where we had difficult experiences and challenges with healthcare providers. And I don't have a suggestion of how to navigate that in a direct one-to-one care way. What I try to do is advance those conversations with, as I said, the regulatory colleges and the organizational bodies that lead how healthcare practitioners are educated here in Canada, to try and affect some change at that level. But on a one-to-one care level, you got to be cautious, because you can alienate your care provider if you push too hard.
Yeah, it sounds like, just listening to you, that things are in a good shape in Canada in the context of the engagement between the system, clinicians, and patients. Is it, from your experience and from your knowledge, are you more advanced, would you say, than perhaps Europe and other parts of the world?
That's a really interesting question, Neil. I would say that in some pockets we are doing really well. I would say in other areas we're not doing as well, and we have a lot of room for improvement. I'll use COVID-19 as an example. We really thought that we had an embedded practice across the country of family caregiver presence. I'm going to use this as an example to highlight how quickly things can change. So our organization, the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement, had worked with 118 hospitals, the most major hospitals across the country, the biggest ones, to change what we were calling visitor policies to family presence policies. So rather than, you can see your loved one from 9 to 11 a.m. or from 5 to 7 p.m., family presence was welcomed, and partnering in care at bedside with the clinical team, the patient, and the most essential family care partner was welcomed. We went from a 36% family presence policy, open family presence, family could be present anytime and were welcomed, to 76% across the country. And that was of January 2020. We did another scan in late March 2020, and the pandemic hit here in Canada in mid-March, or right around our March school break. And so 2 weeks into the pandemic, we did a scan. We had gone from 76% open family presence policies to 0. There wasn't one hospital in the country that was welcoming essential care partners, family care partners, to be at bedside. The only exceptions were pediatric hospitals. Mothers giving birth could have a partner with them, and persons who were identified as end of life being imminent. And so why did that happen? Well, there was no patient engagement or partnership at those policy roundtables. We call them command tables here in Canada, where we were developing COVID policy in every single jurisdiction. Where we did have patient and family advisory councils ready and able, and sort of, able to pivot quickly in a time of COVID to have those conversations, they weren't engaged. There was no reach out to them. And so while we might have been strong and thought that we had embedded principles of family caregiver presence and patient engagement in creating policy, it went away quite quickly. So that's, it's the reason I'm sort of offering that suggestion that we think we're good in some respects, but that we have instability in patient engagement, patient partnership. Another great example is that one of our provinces had identified the need to have a strategic advisor to a minister of health and to his health ministry from a patient partner. And this is in the province of Ontario, where we had a minister's patient and family advisory council chair who was working in a leadership capacity within the Ministry of Health in that province. And with a change in government, that leadership role, that patient family engagement and partnership role across the ministry disappeared and wasn't supported in the same way. And so, again, our structures are not I would say bulletproof. They're not robust enough yet. I think we're leading in a number of different areas, but we have a long ways to go to make sure that this is embedded practice across the country.
It's interesting you mentioned the COVID scenario, because actually when COVID hit, many in the patient advocacy world actually said that COVID has set us back enormously, in the sense that literally governments took over and shut down systems. And ironically, in the case of cardiac patients, to some, maybe I'm biased in saying this, we were probably the most disenfranchised community. And actually, it's a real issue, because the messaging was so strong about, stay away, stay at home, lock yourself up, cocoon, that we actually had people putting their fear of COVID before their heart health, having symptoms of heart attack, experiencing heart attack, and dying rather than going to hospital. And so now we have a situation where many patients are afraid to break out of the cocooning, to go to hospital and to seek help. And it's actually a challenge that our own patient groups are trying to address. Would you have any thoughts or ideas on how we might, from an advocacy point of view, how we might address this issue, which is that many cardiac conditions, for example, we have a subgroup within the Global Hub on valve disease, for example. And we know that in the case of severe aortic stenosis, which is a particular condition, the prognosis without treatment is worse than many forms of cancer. Yet these patients, their procedures are being cancelled. There's no clear plan as to how they when they will be called forward, and how the system is going to gear up to deal with the backlog. And so we as a group we're actually struggling with, from an advocacy point of view, what can we do? Would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say first, Neil, that we're experiencing the same thing here in Canada, and the experience of people avoiding the emergency departments for fear of COVID or being told like stay home has had a significant backlash in many of the major chronic disease communities, heart health, COPD, cancer. So you're not alone in that. So there, from my point of view, there are a couple of solutions. I think one is that we have to make sure that as patient partners and as organizational leaders, people like yourself, we're working really closely with public health to change the narrative a little bit and to update the messaging. That chronic disease still has to be monitored, that you still need to be accessing care, that care is safe to access. And so all of those key messages. And I think that's something that a pivot that occurred here in Canada that we were pleased to see, and people did start going back to emergency departments to get the care and treatment they needed. From a policy point of view, in terms of how we are identifying resource in the healthcare system, and where the resources are going, and these lockdowns on things like elective surgeries, diagnostic care and treatment, that is that for me is the necessity of getting patient partners to these command tables and to these policy tables. That has not yet occurred in a comprehensive way across our country. It's starting to happen. We're starting to creep back into having patient partners, patient advocates at those decision-making tables, or to at least be involved in an adjacent conversation to inform those tables. But it's not happening in a comprehensive way. I think the other concern that I have, and you said this earlier in your remark, is that we've taken a highly centralized harm or risk-based approach to the pandemic. Everything is about COVID. And I will be very clear from my vantage point that everything cannot be about COVID. If we look at harm and risk in the system to patient care and patient safety and outcomes, COVID is very much a part of that, but it is not the singular focal point. And I think we've overemphasized it as a singular focal point. So again, it's getting those messages made clear. It's building the evidence base as well. And patients can partner in building that evidence base. Here in Canada, we have a national strategy called the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research. And I'm sure many of your patient partners are aware of the James Lind Alliance in the UK. This is where patients can drive research topics and research agendas. And here in Canada, we've developed a very short-term and intense research agenda around COVID. And we have patients partnering in that. They are actively involved in identifying the issues, the agenda, what's happening. And I myself am involved as a co-investigator in at least 2 or 3 projects right now that are pending approval. So there's a space there for patients to become involved in driving that agenda and ensuring that we don't have this over-centralized, hyper-vigilant, over-medicalized emphasis on COVID. And that requires having more than one lens at the table. So this has to be a collaborative approach. This has to be multiple voices and multiple perspectives at the table. Bioethics, legal, public health, medical, system leaders, patient, family, and caregiver partners with lived experience.
Yeah, there's so much to what you say there. It, resonates in terms of where we're at as a patient community and the challenges. I mean, you talk about the evidence base, and as I'm listening to you, I'm wondering, should we collectively or locally, should we be reaching out to research centers, advocating that they consider, conducting this type of research? Is that how you'd start the ball rolling in countries where, for example, we don't have the infrastructure that you describe in Canada, just to get these issues on the table?
Yeah, so this really comes from a leadership point of view, and it's people like yourself who have the influence and who likely have the right connections to make these kind of asks of the research community. I'll just give an example from my position and our position at the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement. We wanted to better understand a couple of things about patient safety, patient care, and family caregiver presence in a time of COVID. So we actually directly reached out to a couple of academics who we knew were interested in different aspects of COVID-19, or who were interested in patient engagement and patient partnership, or who were interested in family caregiver presence. And we specifically asked them to take on some research in this space. So we want to know about transmission of COVID from family caregivers to patients in hospital settings. And so we asked a community of researchers, would you take this on? Do you have the space to do it? Now, of course, we had the availability to offer funding for this, or some of the organizations or research academics already had funding, and they were just looking for an organization to partner with. And we brought to the table things like a robust network of patient family caregivers that they could engage with. We also have a robust network of national healthcare organizations across the country that they could network with. So that's one way of doing it, right? Is having an organizational led, having a leadership led, making sure that it has meaningful and authentic patient engagement that is embedded in it, but driving forward some of these key questions in a time of COVID that are specific to patient engagement, patient partnership, or patient experience. And so, you know, there as we have here in Canada, you likely have, you know, interjurisdictional tables that you sit at, or that others like you sit at, where you can have these conversations, where you can influence and challenge what are we doing right now in the research academia space to understand COVID, or to understand patient engagement, patient partnership, or to understand the impact that, you know, having delayed diagnosis and treatment are having on our patients, and how can we work together to drive some research that is specific to, you know, the patient advocacy agenda. And again, like, you know, relying on, or sorry, bringing to the table the evidence base that having this kind of meaningful and authentic collaboration, like a multi-layered lens, will only improve the research. And I would say that maybe not everyone at the table will be receptive, but you're going to have some eyes kind of open and some heads kind of tilt and think, this could be a good idea. I always say that when I do my talks, I wish I could do an analysis of the head tilts in the room, because that's what you want to get. You want to get that,
Get them
aha
tilting.
moment, right?
Yeah. No, very, very valid points there. I'm watching time, and I want to allow people to have an opportunity to ask you questions, because everything you say resonates with, I guess, where we're all at. Jumping back off COVID to the earlier journey with Kate, and you made reference to, you know, talking to doctors and going back to advocacy again. And you actually mentioned in Kate's case about being, you know, undiagnosed in the early days. Again, just from lots of conversations in our community, one of the issues is late diagnosis or misdiagnosis. And another common issue is the question around, you know, how do I learn how to talk to my doctor in a way that I'm an equal player in the discussion? Any tips, advice? And I know we're jumping off topics now here, but just to, I know these are questions that people have asked us before. Any thoughts on that?
So let me just go with the part about how do I talk to my doctor, right? How do I advocate for myself as a patient? Because that's really, really important, and it's not a skill that's taught. So I think the first thing we call it is the elephant in the room of the power differential, right? The patient being a bit more in a space of vulnerability, and the physician being more in a space of power. So how do you smooth that out? Well, you get yourself prepared. You research your condition, you understand as best as you can from a layperson's point of view, the different aspects of your condition, the different options that you might have. And if you don't know what those options are, or if you would like more concrete information about your condition, you ask your clinical provider. And I would say 99% of the time, they'd be very happy to provide that and point you in the right direction. You prepare yourself for meetings. And so now that we're in this time of virtual care, making sure that you have a safe space, like an office space to have your meeting that's quiet, you've got your questions prepared in advance, you've got your notebook, that you're keeping a small file of your most relevant health information, your most recent test or your most recent surgery or your updated medication list. And as much as we like to think that the system is constantly there to take care of us, we have a role in our own self-care and our own self-management. And so those are skills that patients need to start to develop. And that's going to help them level out that power differential. That's going to give them agency in their care. It's going to, you know, help them kind of sit up in that chair a little bit more and ask things about themselves. Because if you don't know about your own condition, your disease, where your treatment is at, it's very difficult to advocate for yourself. So I think as a baseline, that's the first space to start. And we could have a much longer conversation about that. And there's all kinds of materials out there to help patients understand how to advocate for themselves. And then the second part of your question, I'll just have to get you to repeat it. I think it was more from a systemic level.
Yeah, before I go to that though, what you've just described there beautifully is the point about the importance of our own ownership of our own health and self-care. As patient organizations, any ideas on how we can best respond to those needs? Because not everybody is as articulate, for example, as you. And so how do we upskill people to be able to have those conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that, something that Global Heart Health Hub could likely do, and I don't know if you've got like a website or a landing page, but I'll just use the example of the mitochondrial disease community. So we created a foundation a decade ago called Mito Canada Foundation. That space is to serve patients and families whose child or young adult has been diagnosed with mitochondrial disease, and we're very much there to coach and to mentor. So we've developed an infrastructure that we can coach and mentor patients and families about mitochondrial disease. We can connect them with healthcare providers who know of mitochondrial disease in their local jurisdiction. We have easy to read, language appropriate documents there where people can learn about the different types of mitochondrial disease that they have been diagnosed, where they can understand what kind of questions to ask of their healthcare provider. We've got tearaway sheets, so to speak, that you can kind of tear away a sheet and take it with you to the emergency department so you understand medication contraindications or anesthesia contraindications for mitochondrial disease. So we offer a huge layering of the basics of mitochondrial functioning, so you understand mitochondrial disease from a layperson's point of view, to a broader scope of here's some disease specific information. And I think there is a role for organizations like Global Heart Health to take on that educational component, that support component, that coaching and mentoring component. I'll give another example that I love. So there is a pathologist at the Ottawa Hospital, which is one of the major hospitals in Canada, and it's here in Ottawa, Ontario. His name is Dr. Jason Wasserman. And Jason saw that patients were not understanding their imaging results or diagnostic imaging results or their pathology reports. And you can imagine, I'm sure you've all seen your pathology reports and you read it and it's like Greek because it's written in a medical context. And so what Jason and his team done, and you can all access this. This is on a website. It's called mypathologyreport.ca. Jason and a team of Canadian and now international pathologists and also medical artists are writing out pathology reports in layperson's language. So you've got, stage 2 ductal carcinoma in situ, and it's a form of breast cancer, and you're like, I don't know what that means. You go to mypathologyreport.ca, you type this in, and it comes up with images, artistic drawings, beautiful artistic drawings, and a lay person's review, and then sites that you can go to get further information that have also been validated by a medical professional. That's the type of information that patients need. And you don't have to be the most articulate patient, but you have to be inquisitive and understand that you have a role to play in this space. And I think we've got to move from that old school nature of doctors know best and doctors are going to do to and for the patient to this collaborative space that we're going to do with. We are together. You are part of the healthcare team. The system is not there to serve you. It's not about being in a patient-centered healthcare system. It's about being in a patient-partnered healthcare system, that you have agency. And that you've got to step into that space, right? It sucks to have a diagnosis like mitochondrial disease or a very serious heart condition, but you've got to be able to step into that space. And the role of organizations like Global Heart Health Hub is to support patients to step into that space.
You've just given us a very, very exciting project in Global Heart Hub, that's for sure. So that's...
You need to connect with Dr. Wasserman because you could do my pathology report for the whole gamut of heart disease.
Yeah. Well, I was actually more thinking of the Mitocardia Foundation and that whole coach mentor thing, because that's just, it's so obvious. So perhaps you could share those links with us. And I know earlier we were speaking about a document you've created in Canada, the caregiver presence policy document. Would you be able to share that with us as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've just typed in the website for mitocanada.org, and you can go on there and explore and kind of see how a foundation supports their patient, family, caregiver community. And I've typed in there mypathologyreport.ca as well. So go and have a look at the resources that Dr. Wasserman and his team have developed. To your question about the actually recently released as of Monday, this past Monday, policy guidance report on family caregiver presence. This came from, again, a collaborative effort. So the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement do nothing without everybody at the table. So we brought in people who make policy, decision makers, people in our country at the deputy minister, assistant deputy minister level of health. We brought in clinicians. We brought in healthcare system leaders, so hospital leaders or organizational leaders. And then we brought in people with lived experience, so patients or family caregivers that were experiencing challenges with the healthcare system and not able to access their loved one or have their loved one support them in care. And we worked with them over a series of 5 to 6 sessions, policy sessions, where we basically did a real divergent exercise, got everything on the table. What are all the challenges, the barriers, that what was happening in the system in a time of COVID that was of a concern to everybody, or solutions coming from everybody around family caregiver presence. And so then we, through that work, developed this report that I'm just popping into the chat box, which is called Essential Care Partner Policy Guidance. And the hashtag we've been using is Essential Together. And so from that report, we've got 7 areas that we expect healthcare organizations to tackle to bring family caregivers back into healthcare settings: hospital, long-term care, residential care, and what we call congregate care living. So for example, older youth or young adults with developmental disability who are in group home living settings. And so those are the settings that we're talking about, very global perspective, because the issues are the same. Caregivers are not being permitted in for fear of transmission of COVID. We also have accompanied that report by an evidence brief, a 20-page evidence-based document from across the world, so internationally focused, and curated from our team to show all the different areas of our policy guidance, how they're supported by evidence and by research, and the most up to date. Even in a time of COVID, we were able to drive some research, as I mentioned earlier. So all of that is in the evidence brief. And I think it's the first time ever that we've seen an evidence brief like this that's specific to family caregiver presence. And so that document will be coming out within the next week or two to accompany this policy guidance report. And so, our role in the country is to influence healthcare systems and to help them to adapt, to have better quality of care, and to improve patient safety. And that is the basis and the context for this report. It is our position that you cannot have a safe healthcare system if you exclude care partners from being at bedside with patients.
So timely, and I know people will look to that with great interest, because it's irrespective of disease area, it's so relevant. I had another question, but I got to stop because I need to let people ask you. You're just a mine of incredible information, I have to say. I see a question in from Salvatore in Italy, who'd like to just add something on what they did in Italy in relation to advocacy COVID-19. Salvatore, if you're still with us, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Neil. Sorry, because I was a little bit late to join this very interesting talk from Julie, that I would like to congratulate for the many good things they are doing. And I'd also like the last part of involving caregivers. I think is very important. Just to tell everyone what we did as Italian Association of Patients with Heart Failure was to create a telemedicine program. So to bring emergency room at home of patients with heart failure. So what we should think, take the opportunity of COVID to create as advocacy in all the group in our organization, Neil, to have 24 hours nurses able to reply to urgent question, and definitely to have immediately a specialist or a psychologist that they can immediately give a suggestion. So this is going to impact what is the terrible negative impact of COVID on cardiovascular disease. As you say, there are a lot of people that died on the scene because they didn't went to the emergency room, even, and they died at home of myocardial infarction or acute heart failure. So my proposal, and I want also to understand the Julie opinion, how can we really bring telemedicine in the future in our advocacy program to create a permanent international technology that can solve this issue, not only today for the COVID, but for the future, to adequately, even we send at home some people making even echocardiogram. You know what? I'm thinking that this is an opportunity. I really would like to have Julie idea. Is this an opportunity that we can take for telemedicine program that we as a group, Neil, can promote in our big cohort of people?
Very good question, Julie.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question, Salvatore. And it's so relevant now in a time of COVID. What I get a bit incredulous about is that patients have been asking for telemedicine and virtual care for years. And then overnight here in Canada in the time of COVID, we came up with a pay code for physicians, and all of a sudden everyone was talking about virtual care. So this is, again, the value and the importance of engaging and partnering with patients. Patients have wanted this. I think if I can offer you the Canadian context around virtual care and telemedicine, it's very much been at the forefront of discussions both federally and provincially, but there have been a couple of significant barriers that we have not been able to get over. So the number one barrier was the pay code. Physicians did not know how they were going to get paid and how this was going to get organized and how they were going to be compensated. The second significant barrier has been interjurisdictional restrictions. So in our country, a provider can't be communicating across borders, interprovincial borders, with a patient or with another provider. It's not permitted. So we have to figure that out, and that's something that has to be part of our National Healthcare Act. I think the third and the most significant barrier, and I'm not sure how it is in the UK, but here in Canada, we have significant challenges with our legislation that's currently in place. So here we have what's called PHIPA, the Privacy in Healthcare Information Protection Act, and it was written in the 1980s. It is not relevant to a time of virtual care and telemedicine, and it's creating significant barriers of engaging in virtual care, of sharing information across telemedicine networks, and we need to update that information in order to actually be a lot more nimble in being able to provide care in the context that you're suggesting, which is more virtual and telemedicine oriented. So I have confidence that we're going to get there, because I think COVID has shoved us into that space. We can't necessarily meet with our providers one-to-one in person, and we do have to take some of the pressure off of the bricks and mortar structures that we have right now, because we simply can't justify having patients going into a building when we are trying to control for a pandemic. So I think that this is going to push us forward, but it's going to require, I think, addressing those three areas, at least here in this country.
Are there steps, though, to Salvatore's question? Are there specific steps you'd recommend for us as a collective of patient groups?
Well, one specific step I would suggest that we did here in Canada is 3 years ago, this was on my radar as a patient. 3 years ago, we organized a conference that was completely patient developed, led, and delivered. It was to occur in March 26th, and it was called Hearing Our Voices, Patient Experience in Virtual Care and Digital Health. And it got canceled because of the pandemic. We regrouped and we actually held a virtual conference in November, and we're going to be writing a summary report of recommended policy based on the themes and the conversation that came out of that entirely patient-led and developed conference. And so I think you need to mobilize your patient, family, and caregivers into this work. They need to have a voice in this and need to be part of what are the solutions and the next steps. The other big part of this too is getting to your policy leadership and having those frank conversations of here are the key barriers and challenges to having a more robust virtual digital care, telemedicine approach to care, and having solutions for them before you get to the table. So, you want to have a collaborative conversation with them, but I find that when I meet with the policy makers, they want to know that a lot of the work's been done for them. What's the evidence? What's the research? What are the recommended steps? And then they can make some decisions around those recommended steps. We have a national organization here in Canada too that, might be something that you can mobilize as well. I'm not sure, like it would be an EU approach or a UK separate approach. I'm fully aware of Brexit, but where we have something called Canada Health Infoway, which is actually a national body that is meant to push forward this virtual telemedicine, digital health approach to care. So those are some like broader, constructs. There's probably some very specifics one-to-one between the patient and provider that we can talk about as well. But I think you've got to get at some of those broad sort of
ones. Yeah. No, as I'm taking notes here, I can see our work mapped out for the next 5 or 6 years just as a result of this conversation. So we have another question there. I think Pauline, Pauline herself comes from a rare cardiac condition, I believe, perspective, and had a question. Pauline, would you like to?
I will, and I'm just going to, I had already typed something, but really I just want to say thank you to Julie. And I said your passion and capability and application of new initiatives is really astounding and inspirational for the likes of me, and I know other people who are involved, be it through being a patient or working in the area of patient care. So thank you very much. I wanted to just ask you a quick question. I've explained there in my message that I too come from a background of rare illness. I have a rare heart condition, and I set up a national body in Ireland to represent people in Ireland with this condition, and it has been growing over time. And we liaise with various heart charities. We're with CRE and the Irish Heart Foundation. We do a lot of work trying to highlight the condition and provide information to new patients coming on board. But I'm also aware that there's a significant lack of provision in healthcare for our group. And like all the things you mentioned there about the research that they're not fully aware of and all of that. And I'm curious to know, you talk about relationship building outside of our own disease group and the charities we work with. Are there areas you would recommend to us having, as I say, this sort of rare illness and really trying to kind of knock on the door of the professional world, which we find we get either a dismissive response, sometimes a little bit engaging, but often dismissed because we are rare.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in, right, Pauline? I mean, Kate is one of 50 known patients worldwide. So there's a couple of suggestions I have. One is that I find that the voice of the many is very helpful, as you've probably come to realize. And so aligning yourself with other heart health charities and foundations and organizations is very important. Making sure that you are very clear and articulate about the context, the background about this condition, what the challenges that this community has had, and what you see as potential solutions and drivers. So you might want to create yourself a bit of like a policy statement, like a 1 or 2 pager that you can carry with you, and that everyone who is involved with the organization is made aware of. It can also use as a tool. Those tools can be really important. And you've probably already developed communications tools and a bit of a communication strategy. That can be very helpful. I don't know if you've already explored linking yourself to some of the rare disease organizations like Eurordis and others in the UK and in Europe. And here in Canada, the Canadian Organization for Rare Disease, we partner quite often with international organizations as well. We try to get that rare disease international family actually pretty tight, and to shore each other up and to find opportunities to sort of highlight those conditions. So if that's not a community you've explored yet, I think that would be really important.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds great. And the policy document, yeah, I mean, I do feel over time we've almost, through our own individual experiences as patients in the group with our own cardiologists, and that we've kind of come into a standard way of presenting ourselves nearly, and the research is vital. But some are just very closed to the research and to the notion that the patient might have more information on the topic than the cardiologist, which
Yeah.
we're not trying to say they're not doing their job or no, but we have a big vested interest in that particular condition. So we are going to know because our lives depend on it, whereas they have a huge spectrum. So I do always, I compliment them before I before I challenge them on the fact that they have such diverse knowledge on many, many heart conditions, but just this particular one, I feel I kind of know, you know, the latest information on if they would like me to share it. And
so let me just share this, Pauline. Keep at it. You're going to find the person who you're really going to connect with. When Kate was first diagnosed, we met with a academic researcher, like in the lab guy, and his team. And he couldn't understand why this mother of a 4.5-year-old with a rare disease wanted to meet with him. But he was interested in mitochondrial disease. And we met at his lab. She was literally running around touching everything, cute as a button. And we started having a conversation, as you said, about my expertise and knowledge about this rare disease. And he learned so much. To this date, we still connect. I funded his research lab, raising $60,000 for him and his research team. And he now has Kate's genetic material and has developed both yeast models and mice models. I think there's like Kate Drury mice running around his lab. So you're going to find that connection. You just have to keep at it and keep talking to people and keep showing to them the value that you and patients like you bring to the conversation.
Thank you very much,
for that's
Julie.
incredible. Can I jump to Paul? Paul, I know you've been writing furiously there, and I'm not quite sure if you have a specific question, Paul McGreevy.
Neil, no, I don't have a specific question. I'm really interested in what Julie said. It's fantastic ideas that you've come up with, Julie, in terms of working to develop collaboration. I mean, collaboration internationally. I'm specifically interested in collaboration within the European context, but I think that must be far wider than anything that I would specifically talk about with regard to Europe. And I think you've basically summed up what I've been saying to Neil, which is that there is a fantastic 5-year project that I think we need to explore in terms of patient advocacy for the whole range of cardiac conditions and cardiovascular disease. One of the things that we need to do really is to reach clinician organizations, but to reach them at the base level when we're educating cardiologists, cardiac nurses, and laboratory workers, researchers, as you say. That's where we need to start, and I think we need to actually take that forward as a developing project.
Thanks, Paul.
And if I could leave you with a closing comment on that, Paul, you know, this is not a corner of the desk exercise. We've been talking a lot about patient advocacy, engagement, and partnership and leadership. You've got to invest in this. You got to assemble a team, really good leadership. You've got to have people like Pauline and other patient partners who are going to be working with you to reach those people that you're talking about that are actually going to help to shift policy, program change, research, and also care delivery. But it actually has to be something that's embedded into your organization and as a strategy and a framework is developed to actually execute it. Because you can't do it in sort of one-off projects. It's very difficult to do that way, and it takes a much longer time and quite frankly, a lot more money.
Julie, we're exactly on the hour. You're like a shot of a drug in the arm. It's so inspirational, so articulate, so motivational. It's just, it's been incredible. And I hope everybody on the call has gleaned something here because we covered so many topics. I particularly like your last turn of phrase when you describe about the voice of the many. And really, that's what the Global Heart Hub is trying to do here. It's trying to bring the many cardiovascular conditions together. I hope this is going to be the start of our connections with you, because I think you have so much insight and knowledge and experience. I really would love to connect with you again. And certainly from my point of view, you've given great ideas for us in the Global Heart Hub to move forward in a number of different areas. So thank you very, very much for being with us today, and continued success in what you're doing. You obviously have made a huge impact and continue to do so. Thank you very, very much indeed. And we leave it there, everybody. It will be the new year before we resume again. We hope to continue with this program of not quite sure if we'll be able to continue with inputs to the caliber that we've had this year, which has really been inspirational and very motivating. But can I wish you all a very happy and healthy festive season, and hopefully we'll connect with you all again in the new year. Take care.